Recording. Well, hello. Today we have a special guest, Zach from Swedish Center or Swedish Hospital. And today Zach will be talking about his career. Hi, Zach. So my first question really is, Zach, could you let us know what your name is, your profession, and your job title, I guess, and where you're from?
Yeah, so I'm Zach Eastwood. I am the Technology and Operations Manager of the Swedish Simulation Center here in Seattle, Washington. And what we do, we serve the entire Swedish organization, all 5 campuses. We are a training facility for all new nurses that get hired through the system.
Wow. That sounds like a lot of training being done. And I can imagine that you probably see like hundreds, if not thousands, of healthcare professionals on an annual basis.
Oh yeah, our
Well,
average is about 600 a year is how many we get through our program.
600. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Now, could you maybe elaborate a little bit on like your educational background? Did you go to college or stuff like that?
Yeah, certainly. So, at the outset here, you might hear healthcare simulation, and that might fall on your ears as something you've never heard of before. And I'm sure we'll get into more of that in a bit, more specifically what healthcare simulation is and why it's relevant to a healthcare organization. But my background is actually an interesting one as far as I am not clinically trained. My background is actually my undergrad is in graphic design. I went to the University of Oregon and got my bachelor's in graphic design there. And then recently in 2018, I went back to school and got my MBA. So
Mm.
my undergrad graphic design, and then my secondary degree is my master's in business.
Wow. And that's really cool because I think sometimes we have this preconceived bias that healthcare is all just doctors and nurses, and you have to be clinically trained. But I think you are living proof that you don't need to have that.
Yeah, and I've always had a proclivity and a draw to working in healthcare. My whole family is doctors and nurses up and down both sides, so it's always been something that I've been exposed to and interested in. But as I was, going through high school and college, I was looking into anatomy and physiology, biochem, organic chemistry, and they were not my strengths to say the least. But I still really was interested and excited by healthcare. But life took me a different way as far as college and my professional education was concerned. But I am very glad that I found my way back into a healthcare setting and able to leverage my strengths in both technology and also the creative aspects of having an art degree really come into play well in healthcare simulation.
That's really cool. It sounds like you really are kind of the jack of all trades when using all those skills. And you kind of talked a little bit about how life took you in various directions. And we all know that life's not a straight line, even though we try to make it to be.
Yeah.
um, and so my question to you is, could you let us know like at what point did you feel like healthcare simulation is what I want to do? Was it a culmination of moments? Just, yeah, some thoughts in your path there.
Sure. So I graduated with my undergrad in 2012 and was working at a small graphic design firm in Portland. It was a fine job. I enjoyed what I was doing. It was not really filling my cup, but it's when I went to school for. It's kind of what I felt like I should be doing. Then I met somebody. It was actually my sister's boyfriend at the time, and we were
Mm.
having a family dinner and said, oh hey, what do you do for work? And he started talking about this healthcare simulation job, and this was around 2014 at the time. And the more he talked about working with these high fidelity patient simulators, these big robots that bleed, sweat, cry, simulate all the functions of a real patient, working with complex AV systems, 3D printing, working with silicone, the more my brain started to turn, I was like, this sounds really cool. Like, and
Yeah, yeah,
for context, his background was also not clinical. So I knew I was like, oh, this might be something I could do. So
right.
I talked to him a little bit more about it after that dinner and said, can you tell me a little bit more about this healthcare simulation? What is it all about? Can I maybe come shadow you for a day just to see if it's something I'm really interested in? And after spending a day with him in his sim lab and seeing what this job actually was and entails, I was immediately sold. I
Mm.
asked him, "This is great. Who do I talk to? Where do I start looking to get a job in this field?" And so, and from there, the rest was history. I started off though small. there's a lot of programs throughout. I mean, for where we are, the West Coast in Seattle, up and down the West Coast, there's a lot of programs. Most nursing schools have simulation in one form or another, whether it's a large-scale sim lab, similar to what we have here at Swedish, or if it's just a one-room simulation suite. But regardless, they need somebody to run the technology, the
Mm,
simulation technology specialist, or otherwise known as a simulation operations specialist. We call them SimTechs for short.
yeah.
And those folks are typically non-clinical. And so I started small. I started working at Bates Technical College in Tacoma.
Mm,
Back when I started there in 2014, they were a one-room simulation center. So it was not big by any means. They've recently remodeled and are actually quite a large program now. But I did start there in 2014 for a year. I worked with them in their nursing program, really kind of cutting my teeth in learning the ins and outs of healthcare simulation, what
mm,
it's all about. Working in a nursing school is a little bit different than working in a hospital system. I can talk more
okay.
about that later.
Yeah.
So after a year there, I started to think, all right, well, this is great. I'm always hungry for more and want want more responsibility and more scale. That's kind of more. And
Sure.
so I saw that Swedish was hiring, and I had heard at the time that Swedish was kind of the gold standard of simulation on the West Coast. So that was
Mm,
sort of always my end goal, is to I got to get to that Swedish place.
yeah.
They were hiring. I applied, interviewed, and started as a sim tech here at Swedish in 2015, and then transitioned to the operations manager role in 2019.
Wow. And it's amazing how that pathway was really kind of ignited in that happenstance conversation with, that person that you met at the dinner table. So it's
Very
crazy how
serendipitous.
very serendipitous. And I think when I hear simulation, because I've conversed with you multiple times, I kind of know what it is. But I think, us as high school students might not always understand what healthcare simulation is. So could you maybe take us through like your day of like what you do, what do you see, what do you hear, feel? Just what is healthcare simulation?
Yeah, so healthcare simulation in one form or another has been around for, hundreds of years even. It's
Mm,
basically just it's practicing. It's so as long as there's been cadaver labs, dissecting of animals, humans, that's a form of simulation. You're practicing in a low stakes environment where you're trying to learn a procedure without causing harm to a patient. That's being
mm,
pretty, big picture. Modern simulation in the way we know it today really started in the early 1960s. And you might be familiar if you've ever done swim lessons or if you've been a lifeguard, those CPR mannequins that they have that you
mm-hmm.
practice on. That's
Right.
simulation. That's
Mm,
practicing. That's making sure that if you do find someone who's drowning or needs assistance, that you know and you practice how to give compressions, how to give mouth to mouth before you actually encounter that event. So when it does happen, you're like, oh, I've simulated this, I've practiced, I'm ready, I'm good to go. So in the
right.
most simple of terms, that's where modern simulation started. Kind of fast forward to today, what our focus is to train all new nurses that come in through our system. So
Mm-hmm.
nurses that are in nursing school, they do have a simulation in nursing school. They're more focused on what we call skills based. So um, moving their patients, turning their patients, doing basic assessments, so checking temperature, blood pressure, administering medications, just the basics that you do when you're first starting out with a patient. When they graduate nursing school, they've passed their nursing exams, they're ready to go, they've done some clinicals, but it can be pretty overwhelming to start work in a hospital system. There's a lot
Yeah.
of moving
Yeah.
parts, a lot of pieces that you got to take into consideration. And
Right.
so what we have here at Swedish is what we call a nurse residency program. So
Mm-hmm.
when we hire nurses, they come in into our program, and we do 7 cohorts a year, and that's where that
Mm-hmm.
600 nurses come from. Each cohort is roughly 100 to 150 nurses. It can kind
A
of
lot of
scale up and down.
nurses.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
lot. And so when they come in, we break them into specialties. Depending on what specialty they are, they're with us anywhere from 12 to 20 weeks. And then we run them through a series of what we call high stakes, low frequency simulations. And these
Okay.
simulations are 4-hour events typically.
Mm,
They come to our simulation center. They do an hour to an hour and a half of didactic. So sitting in a classroom, going over PowerPoint, talking about the objectives for the day. For example, they're going to do blood administration. They're going to, administer blood to their patients. So they're going to talk a little bit about that. They're going to go over the standards, the policies and procedures and best practice.
mm-hmm.
And then after they're done with that didactic, the sim tech will come and take them from their classroom and escort them to the sim room. And these rooms are built to look just like a real hospital unit. We've got hospital
Wow.
beds, we've got a functioning head wall with the oxygen, the suction, everything you'd expect to find in there, patient monitor, blood pressure cuff, all the trappings of a hospital room. So if you didn't know any better, you'd walk in and think, I'm in a real hospital room.
Right, right.
Only differentiator is instead of a patient, we've got one of our mannequins in the bed. And so, as I mentioned
Yeah.
before, when I said high fidelity, that just means really high tech. And so, these
Okay.
mannequins, they can blink, their eyes react to light, they
They
can
can
sweat.
blink. Oh my gosh.
Oh yeah, so you can do a full neuro assessment on them, shine the light in their
Wow.
eye, and it will contract. And so the goal is they mimic a real patient. And
Okay.
so we do these high stakes, low frequency events so that, like I mentioned before, with when you're learning CPR at swim lessons or when you're being a lifeguard, so when they're administering blood in real life, if something goes wrong, they have trained for that in simulation and know
Hmm.
exactly how to react. Because when you're a new nurse and you're in these circumstances where things go wrong, you're usually off to the side while the experienced folks come in and take charge. And you can learn that way, but it's like when if you're in math class and you're like having a hard time solving a problem. Well, if your friend comes in and just does the problem for you, you don't really learn it, do you? You have to have
Right,
someone
right.
walk you through and actually have your hands on it. That's where simulation comes into play, where during sim, it's a safe environment. It is okay if you fail. We're not grading you. We're just trying to help you learn and grow in your skills. So that way, when
Right.
they do administer blood, spoilers, they have a reaction. They have to, yeah, right. It's not going to go well on simulation. We want them to have a thing they have to react to. And so the patient has anaphylaxis, has an anaphylactic reaction. Their airway closes, they can't breathe, they're wheezing. So they have to get epinephrine and administer it IM. So have to do the injection in the thigh, like an EpiPen. And in real life, you've got precious little time to get that done. In sim,
Hmm.
they can take a little bit longer. They can critically think through. They can go grab their medication. They can think, how do I want to administer this? Do I do it IV? Do I do it IM? How much do I draw up? And so
Hmm.
then they can decide, administer it, the patient is saved. And so what the sim tech is doing during all of this is they're the ones that set up the room to make it look real. The
Hmm.
sim tech is also controlling the mannequin. So we actually play the voice of the patient. We've got a very high tech AV system. We've got microphones in our control booth where we control everything. So we're actually talking to the nurses. We've got
Wow.
patient backgrounds. We're working with an educator next to us too. So we've kind of got like a team dynamic going in the control booth. So we're trying to make it as real as possible. We also use what we call moulage. It's a French word. It just means to create these fake wounds to make the
Hmm.
patient look as real as possible. So when they have the anaphylactic reaction, we can employ different technologies to make them light up and turn red and appear visibly like
That's
different and
so
like they're
cool.
having a problem. Yeah, so we're trying to make it as real as possible. And that goes top to bottom. So the medications they administer, they're all simulated. None of it is live here in the simulation center, but we do
Mm.
actually have our proprietary fluids that we mix up that they will actually draw and administer to the mannequin. So we'd make everything as real as possible. So that way the
Wow.
nurses, a week later, we've had this happen millions of times where like we do our blood administration sim, for example. A week later, the nurse is back with us for a different sim. Like, oh my God, I did the blood sim that same week. I gave my patient blood and they had a reaction and I knew exactly what to do because of sim. And that's where it
That's
really comes
so
full
cool.
circle.
Wow. I was just kind of imaging all these things as you were talking about the supplies, technology, and the people being part of this. And you were talking about how when you're a nurse, there's a lot going on, but I feel like your job also has a lot going on. Um, and so Zach, I'm curious, like what makes someone good at this job? And I think in some sense, I was getting the sense that your diverse background with graphic design and business is all coming into play as well. But any kind of general thoughts on, what kind of skills and knowledge you need to be good at this?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we get asked that all the time. We're actively hiring for somebody right now, and the constant question from our team is like, "Well, who should I refer to this program? Who would be a good sim tech?" And
Right.
really, what you want to have is a strong background in technology, and that could be either amateur background. So, for example, I am just always been in technology, computers, video games, keeping up to date with the latest tech and what's going on. So, being well versed in technology and the ability to troubleshoot networking issues or programming issues, that's huge. If you've got a strong aptitude for technology, that's a big bonus. The other one is a healthcare background. So if you've done some NAC training or CNA training, but you do that and you're like, I don't know if working at the bedside is really what I want to do, but I want to stay in healthcare. Having
Hmm.
that healthcare background is a big boon as well, because we always say we can train you up on one side or the other. So if you got that tech background, we'll teach you the healthcare. If you got the healthcare background, we'll teach you the tech background. So as
Mm.
long as you got a strength in either of those areas, to get more specific, so healthcare simulation and being a simulation operations specialist is a relatively new thing. It's really only been around
Yeah.
since about 2010, and the official
Wow.
certification for it by the governing body, they're called the Society for Simulation in Healthcare. There is a certification you can achieve after you've been in the industry for 2 years, and that's only been around since 2013. So
Okay.
it's still pretty new.
Yeah.
But as a result, there are some degree and certificate programs that are coming up to train you to become a sim tech. One of
Hmm.
them that exists right now is at Big Bend Community College out in Moses Lake. I was an adjunct professor with them for a little bit, helping folks get ready for healthcare simulation. So that is a plus. It's not required though. What most folks are looking for is a strong technology background or a healthcare background and the ability to be flexible. Because, like you
Mm.
said, we've got a lot of a lot of competing sources for our attention in the control booth. We've got an educator who was helping us, we're working together to navigate through the scenario. You've got
Right.
nurses on the other side of the wall that you're communicating with as the patient, and as soon as you stop responding, they think you're non-responsive and want to pull the code switch. So you got to keep them engaged. You're also controlling the
Yeah.
cameras, you're putting orders into the EHR, you're controlling the mannequin on the computer. So you've got a lot of plates spinning. So the ability
Right.
to split task is really important. We did a whole study on multitask, or being able to multitask, which, spoilers, you can't. There's split tasking and background tasking. So being able to split task is really important in simulation.
That's really cool. Being able to have your attention in all kinds of places and an interest in technology and healthcare in general. That's really cool. So listening to you, and this happens with all my conversations. I feel like I need a career change now
It is really
because
fun.
it's cool. Um, Now, is it all rainbows and roses? Like, are there any challenges that you've kind of run into through the healthcare simulation career path, or is it just all great? Would love to hear kind of any thoughts around that.
Sure. There can be challenges. A lot of it stems from where I mentioned it's still a fledgling career, though a professional career nonetheless. Some organizations struggle to get buy-in. So they have a simulation program, but the C-suite of the organization thinks, well, we have nurse educators, they can just run all the technology. But that's not always the case. Their knowledge is specific to healthcare, not necessarily IT and technology. So it'd be like if they told me, well, you're a sim tech, you can just go take care of patients. Like, no, they're very different. So
Mm,
getting the buy-in from an organization can be tough to justify a position and to keep it year round.
mm,
Fortunately, at Swedish, we've got large buy-in from our organization, and they really believe in the importance of SimTechs, and we've demonstrated to them. That is changing as times go on, but that is a
right.
kind of industry-wide hurdle that needs to be overcome. More specifically, in the job here is
Mhm.
technology fails. And sometimes you got to figure out how to make it go on. And we
Uh-huh.
tell them no matter what, the show must go on. We've got
Mhm.
learning hours we need to achieve. So you're getting ready for a simulation and everything breaks. Nothing's working. And you're trying to
Yeah.
troubleshoot as fast as you can. You spend about 10 minutes on it, but you got to do the simulation anyway. So the ability to be flexible, and it might not be perfect or exactly what you want, but the important thing is, are the learning objectives met? So we
Right.
always call it modifying the fidelity. So maybe the mannequin's not working and they can't actually get the vital signs from the mannequin. Well, then we're just going to announce them overhead with our AV system.
Right.
Is it
Right.
perfect? No, but they're still going through their objectives and the learning is being met. So, and that for me as a
Yeah.
perfectionist can really frustrating and really make you want to think like, oh, that could have gone so much better, but it's out of your control
Sure.
sometimes. So
Sure.
that's a barrier for sure. um Others is, it's such a niche job right now that when we're trying to hire for it to find those folks, that's why I
Yeah.
think something like this is so important, because I feel most of your audience is, they're going to hear this and this is going to be the first time they've ever heard of healthcare simulation. So
Right.
really trying to spread awareness that this is something that you can do, and it is a professional career path. You can move your way up through an organization as a healthcare simulation technology specialist to an operations manager, and then once you're in a hospital system, there's tons of other avenues that you can pursue, and you gain so much insight with how a healthcare organization works that if you want to be more of the admin side of a
Mhm.
hospital or healthcare organization, you gain so much insight to how all the pieces connect that you actually are a valuable asset to a hospital once you've been in this role. So
Right.
there's lots of other avenues and offshoots that can come from healthcare simulation.
Yeah. And I think if you're training 600 nurses to be equipped, I mean, that's very valuable. And I think also when it comes to like rolling with the punches and trying to get industry buy-in, while that's potentially frustrating, especially as a perfectionist like yourself, and I can relate too. um, what is something that you love about the job? I mean, obviously, this is a job or career that has continued to fulfill your desires around working. So, what's the one thing that students would be like, wow, this is what Zach loves about his job?
Yeah, one thing I got to say is the healthcare simulation technology specialist community is an incredibly passionate bunch. So already when you're in the community, everyone loves what they do so much. And I think the main reason is because no 2 days are the same. There's
Mm,
always something different you get to work on. So I kind of mentioned earlier that I have an art degree and that comes in handy. And that does come in handy because when creating these simulated medications, being able to use my, Adobe software to make really realistic looking medications that actually scan into our electronic health records, working
mm,
with silicone products. So we make our own custom trainers here. So we make pressure ulcer trainers, we make gunshot wound trainers, we make IV
wow.
trainers. And so you get to work with your hands a lot and really create. It's kind of like professional arts and crafts to the point where sometimes you're like,
Yeah.
I'm getting paid to do this. Like I get to work with my 3D printer and 3D print custom trainers and molds.
Sure.
You get to work with Arduinos and microprocessors. So really there's just so many different things you get to do. And then doing simulations themselves. No two simulations are the same. You might do three
Hmm.
blood administrations in a day, but each group of learners is going to approach things a little bit differently. So it kind of keeps you on your toes and keeps you guessing with what's going to happen next. And it's just the fulfillment of seeing them grow. So when they come in their first week of simulation versus their last week, and just I've been with you for the last 20 weeks and seen you grow in your practice. And it's just amazing to see the nurse that you're going to become. And then when they
Yeah.
come back later to help out in the program as one of our, we call them embedded participants, they can sometimes play a patient role themselves, or they're
Yeah.
coming in to help out with the simulation. Just be like, man, I remember when you were in this program 3 years ago, and now you're a charge nurse, or now you're like,
Oh,
a nurse manager. And it's great to see you grow and come full circle. So I think the biggest ones is no 2 days are the same, and you really get to be creative in this job.
that's awesome. The variety that you get to kind of be part of, the awesome, passionate bunch of people that you get to kind of work with. And that's really awesome that you get to see the progression of the nurses that you work with. Um, I think right now, well, actually, one question before we go on. Do you have to be like really good at art? Like my art abilities start and end with stick figures. So I just wanted to see what you meant by artistic abilities and creativity there.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. No, you do not need to be a classically trained artist. You just have to enjoy the creative process. So, I mean,
Okay.
for example, I've got three new techs on my team. They all came from various backgrounds. One of them, for context for your folks listening, one of them did coach-to-coach communication for the Seahawks and video networking, so nothing related to simulation. The other one worked IT for the hospital system. And then one of them has clinical background. He was an ED scribe. So one of the folks that's in the ED documenting while things are happening. So all three of them came without any simulation experience or artistic experience, which is where I'm going with this one. And within a year, they're all 3D printing and making custom trainers and doing all these amazing things. So I think you're not giving yourself enough credit here with the stick figures. I think once given these new tools, you'd be like, wow, I actually can make really cool and meaningful things. So
Okay. Okay.
and you don't have to be an artist to mix silicone together. So even if there's already made trainers and molds, all right, you can mix part A, part B, and then make it pretty and pour a silicone mold. So and
Yeah.
there's different avenues. So like I mentioned before, you can work with Arduinos and microprocessors to build custom trainers. If you've got interest in programming, you can make your own custom screen-based simulators that we utilize in the Sim Center. So there's lots of different avenues and ways to flex that creativity.
Okay. So I think myself included and others are like getting ready to flex their creativity by, trying to explore this career path. And, as we talk about kind of the career path from here, my question is, the audience that we're really reaching out to are folks that are very diverse. And one question is, how do we kind of think about breaking down barriers to make sure that, the simulation lab culture and the healthcare culture is anti-racist and also inclusive? Just any thoughts around that?
Yeah, that's actually a really big initiative for us right now. Our diversity, equity, and inclusion (DEI) initiatives for simulation. It's tough. There's a lot that needs to be researched and approached carefully to make sure it's done right. So, for example, we recently got a new fleet of mannequins, and when we are getting those mannequins, we had the conversation, what skin tones do we get?
Mm,
Do we get all white? Do we get white and dark skin? Do we get a mixed? Like, what are we going to do here? And initially, of course, the conversation was, yes, let's get a diverse mixture of mannequins. But the one issue there is you can't just change the skin tone of a mannequin for a simulation and call it good. I wish it were that easy, but the reason why is because your educators that are delivering the simulation really need to be versed in those difficult conversations that happen in the debrief. So
mm,
all those implicit bias conversations to make sure that it's actually beneficial. I mean, I wish it were as easy as like, a patient of color, you're going to be treated the same way. But in
mm,
healthcare, the statistics show that's just not the case, as unfortunate as it is. So we're still working on doing the research for our adult male population. We've begun trialing some DEI simulations with our perinatal, so labor and delivery OB simulations, because the mortality rate for moms of color is just outrageously high and doesn't need to be that high. So we did a lot of research about the statistics and conversations that need to be had, the implicit bias, the questions that learners might ask. And so we do have a couple of simulations where we do have our sim mom of color in place. And then
mm,
our debrief is very structured around those DEI questions. And it's also not something that any of our educators can jump into. We actually require that they attend some of our DEI training courses to make sure that they're handling it appropriately, because that's the worst thing. If you try to have a meaningful simulation, especially with diversity and equity included, and they don't take it seriously, or questions are asked and they're not addressed. For example, one of our simulations where it is a mom of color, their patients asked about drug use, and the learners specifically asked about cocaine use. When we
mm,
used our white mom, that wasn't a question. They were not trying to be malicious, but that was an important thing to talk about. Like, why did you
mm.
specifically ask that question? Let's talk a little bit more about that and unpack it. And those are hard conversations to have, and not
Right.
everyone feels ready to have those. So that's why I say it's delicate, and we really want to make sure we approach it the right way. So we're working with other organizations to kind of source some standards and best practice for diversity and simulation, but it is something we
Right.
take really seriously and are actively working towards.
And when you incorporate that DEI lens, the diversity, equity, inclusion lens into, how you kind of perform the simulations, how is also the work culture, like who you hire and, how you kind of interact with, diverse colleagues. Any thoughts there?
What would be a little more specific? Can you rephrase?
Yeah, so I guess, if someone of color is going into the simulation profession, do you feel like the community is very supportive, kind of, ready to
Okay.
go, that kind of stuff?
I can't speak for everybody. I know here, absolutely. We've
Hmm.
got some diverse folks on our staff, both in our education and our tech team. Just with the nurses that we hire too, that come through our cohort. It's a wide diversity of different backgrounds. So I think Swedish is a very inclusive organization. In the healthcare simulation community events that I've been to, different international conferences, I do feel that there's a pretty strong representation and diversity abound. Can't speak for everybody though across the board, but I do know here at Swedish we do take that very seriously.
Really cool. And so now with someone excited to go into healthcare simulation, and trying to think about their next steps. So let's say that I'm like a high school senior or junior, and some questions I think that come to my mind would be, do I need to go to college? Or can I get like a certificate and then, find a way? College is not always the end all be all, but what are the kind of venues that you think one can take in order to get to where you are?
Yeah. So like you said, college is not the be all end all. It's great for some, not always for others. I can say that for our positions when we hire, a bachelor's degree is preferred, not required. So if you don't have a bachelor's degree, we absolutely do not count you out. We've hired sim techs before that did not have them. They were great. They went on to do amazing things. Most importantly is to at least try to achieve some level of higher education, whether it's a certification or a bachelor's degree. If you
Hmm.
are looking for a field to consider, I think anything in IT or technology, so software design development, or doing something with a business background, even focused in healthcare, would be a great avenue to pursue as well. If you're not going the traditional college route, then
Hmm.
doing CNA or NAC education, respiratory therapy education,
Hmm.
or EMT. So many sim techs that I've worked with have or are all three of those things: EMT, respiratory therapist, or a CNA, NAC. So those are areas that if you're interested in this field, I would certainly pursue. There's also opportunities like at our sim center, if anyone were ever to reach out to me and say, hey, I'd love to just come take a look, shadow, see what it's all about. More
Mm.
than happy to walk folks through and show them what we have to offer. And for the high school folks, Swedish works with the COPE Health Program, COPE. It's an
Mm.
acronym. I apologize. I do not remember what it stands for, but we have junior COPE scholars, and those are high school students that actually volunteer through the hospital and
Mm.
do rotations in our sim center. So that's a really great way to actually spend time in the sim center, get your hands on some of the equipment, and really
Mm.
see what it's like to be a sim tech and also get some of those community service hours as well. So any volunteer opportunities like that, I think, are well worth looking into.
Wow. So it sounds like there's a flexible way to kind of go into this, route. You could either go to college or not, while the college is preferred. And then just making sure that you have both that healthcare and or technology experience. And it sounds like that COPE scholars and also just kind of reaching out to you or someone that does that healthcare simulation shadowing would be helpful. So, I think in the video description, I feel like a YouTuber, like below, I can
Comments down below.
comments down below. I can put in the Cope Scholar kind of information such as well.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to provide the contact information for that. It's a great program. We've worked with them for a number of years. The Cope Scholar. One of our sim techs actually was a former Cope Scholar. So, like, there
Oh,
you go, right
great.
there. Like, it comes full circle.
That's
We
awesome.
we're open for a position. We're like, we got to get Sam. He's great. He was an amazing Cope Scholar. Let's get him in here. And now he went on to nursing school, and he just graduated, and he's a nurse. So sad to see him
Wow.
leave our team, but awesome that he's now a nurse. So go Sam.
That's great. Shout out to Sam. And I guess, we're kind of coming to the end of our conversation. And so any final thoughts and or advice you would want to give to anyone interested in pursuing this path?
Yeah, I feel like I can't drive it home enough that this is more and more as the years go by a legitimate, strong, and respected career path in healthcare. I mean, I've only alluded to it. There's so much more that you can get into to find out more about this job. But there's certifications for it. There's a new advanced certification that just came out. There's international conferences. There's opportunities to give presentations and to share your
Mm,
knowledge and growth. I actually was served on the board of directors for a nonprofit here in the Pacific Northwest that is all about healthcare simulation and uniting and collaborating with all the different organizations up here in the Pacific Northwest. So
mm,
there's a lot of folks out there. It's more widespread than you might think. Just jump online, look out there, Google healthcare simulation jobs, Google healthcare simulation, look at Society for Simulation in Healthcare, healthysimulation.com. There's a lot of resources where you can really see,
yeah.
wow, there's a lot of cool stuff out here, and it really ranges. I mean, there's the vendor route where you could work with the virtual reality simulation and
Mm,
be a vendor and sell VR simulations. You can work for one of the many mannequin companies. You can be a sim tech. There's just
mm.
so much that you can do in healthcare simulation, and it's one of the jobs that I'm so glad that I I kind of fell into it because I really can't imagine doing anything else. And after I graduated college, if you asked me where you're going to be in 10 years, I would not have said this, but I can't imagine doing anything else.
That's so great. And I think we'll just end there. I can sense your passion and love for this. So thank you so much, Zach, for this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Joe. I appreciate it.